With a clean and decisive breakout achieved, Bradley's immediate problem became that of inflicting on the enemy the greatest possible destruction. The enemy concentrated the bulk of his available armor at Mortain and continued his obstinate attack until August 12th.
If the Germans succeeded in breaking through at Mortain, the Allied position beyond that area would be grave.
The air cooperation of the U.S. 9th Air Force and the RAF against the enemy attack was extraordinarily effective. The Royal Air Force had a large number of Typhoons equipped with rocket-firing devices. These kept up a sustained assault against the enemy's forces that was of great help to the defending infantry.
Successfully withstanding the brunt of the Nazi attack, the Allies now moved to encircle the forward Nazi units. This maneuver was to be accomplished by a double thrust, by the Canadian First Army toward Falaise and by the U.S. Third Army toward Argentan. Patton's Third Army split into two major groups, one section driving straight eastward from Laval and the other swinging around the Nazis' flank and driving north into the German position at Argentan.
By the night of August 13th, the U.S. 5th Armored Division was in the outskirts of Argentan. The French 2nd Armored Division was nearby, and the U.S. 79th and 90th Divisions were in close support.
In the giant pincers between Falaise and Argentan, the Germans suffered staggering casualties. Thousands killed and wounded in only a few days' fighting.
In the aggregate, considerable numbers of Germans succeeded in getting away. Their escape, however, meant an almost complete abandonment of their heavy supply and was accomplished only by terrific sacrifices.
Meanwhile, the Canadian drive into the Germans' flank from the north at Falaise met determined Nazi resistance. By driving south through Falaise, the Canadians planned to join forces with the Americans near Argentan and thus completely encircle the forward Nazi attacking units. If this operation was successful, the roads across France would be open to Allied use, and nothing could stop an all-out Allied chase of the disorganized enemy to the banks of the Rhine. The battle on the Germans' northern flank was one of the most concentrated actions in the campaign on the continent. Against desperate resistance, the Canadian First Army troops hit the enemy in a direct frontal assault.
The Canadians threw in fierce and sustained attacks, but it was not until August 16th that Falaise was finally captured.
3 days later, near the little town of Chamois, the pincers closed as the Canadian Army, which took Falaise, met the Americans who seized Argentan, and a large Nazi force was effectively trapped. Many of the Nazi prisoners were disarmed and searched by French patriots who volunteered eagerly for the job. Though a considerable number of German troops escaped eastward toward the River Seine, more than 100,000 Nazi soldiers were caught within the circle and taken prisoner by the Allies.
8 infantry divisions and 2 panzer divisions were captured almost in their entirety.
For the Germans, the encirclement of thousands of their crack troops was supplemented by the loss of great quantities of invaluable materiel, which they could not immediately replace.
The battlefield at Falaise was unquestionably one of the greatest killing grounds of any of the war areas. Roads, highways, and fields were so choked with destroyed equipment and with dead men and animals that passage through the area was extremely difficult.
The Battle of the Falaise Pocket ended according to plan.
While the bulk of Bradley's forces was engaged in this great battle, General Middleton's 8th Corps turned back to the westward to overrun the Brittany Peninsula. He made a rapid advance and invested Saint-Malo, a small port on the north coast. The garrison resisted fanatically, but Middleton was able, with cooperating air and naval forces, to bring to bear enough power to reduce it by August 14th, although remnants of the garrison held out for 3 more days.
For weeks, the 8th Corps assaulted the Nazi defenses on the Brittany Peninsula before the enemy capitulated. The German garrison, what was left of it, surrendered after an exhausting siege. Some of the defenders had obviously fortified themselves with alcohol during the drawn-out battle and were most uncooperative about answering questions put to them by their captors. The goal of every Allied soldier, from private to general, who set foot on the soil of France in the summer of 1944, was Paris. For General Jacques Leclerc, commander of the French 2nd Division, which had fought brilliantly in the desert campaign in Africa against Rommel, this goal had a special meaning. The moment when the French capital would finally be freed drew excitingly close as the Allies rolled victoriously through the crowded streets of newly liberated French towns. This was the momentous day the townsfolk had dreamed about for 4 long years. For in June 1940, with the arrival of the Nazi troops, the gay city that was Paris had changed into a somber, spiritless German garrison town, which the Nazis planned to turn into a playground for the military. Everywhere there were German uniforms. The conquering Nazi soldiers who had marched into Paris in June were replaced by special occupation troops. And always there was a steady flow of German fighting men back from the fronts for liberty. The City of Light became a city of sorrow under the shadow of the swastika. From the day they occupied it, the Nazis fell to work on transforming the face of the city. Evidences of this metamorphosis on every side reminded doleful Parisians that their city was no longer theirs. As expected, the Nazis with their Gestapo ruled Paris with an iron hand. With the German military in complete control, the city became an armed camp and functioned in an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust under the strict surveillance of the ubiquitous Nazi soldiery. Even traditional French ceremonies were conducted under the watchful eye of the conquerors. However, Parisians did succeed in keeping the torch burning at the tomb of their unknown soldier of World War I throughout the Nazi occupation. But the Nazi occupation forces did not supervise everything that went on in Paris and the surrounding country. From the outside world came the voices of freedom. Voices like General de Gaulle, urging his countrymen to remain firm in their trust in the final victory for France and its people. Loyal Frenchmen did not merely mark time during the occupation. Soon after the Germans imposed their rule, resistance groups sprang up all over the country. Seizure of ammunition had a high priority on the list of resistance activities aimed at undermining the Nazis at every opportunity. Demolition of rail lines had a crippling effect on Nazi movements of troops and equipment. A true picture of what was actually happening in France and in the free world outside was presented in the pages of resistance newspapers, published secretly and distributed to Frenchmen eager for a few words of hope. Hundreds of underground newspapers were published during the occupation under overwhelming handicaps. The Allies sometimes managed to drop supplies to those groups who were among the most active in the resistance. The Maquis, whose members hid in the hills to avoid being forced into Nazi labor gangs. With this badly needed equipment, the Maquis operated as guerrillas and sometimes killed several hundred Nazi soldiers in surprise attacks. After D-Day on the Normandy beaches, the various Maquis groups were organized into the FFI, French Forces of the Interior, to assist Allied troops in the destruction of the enemy. In mid-August, with Allied armies only a few kilometers from Paris, the resistance opposition to the Nazis flared into open insurrection. The long-planned revolt began to take shape. All Parisians knew the Allies were not far off, and their mounting hate toward their Nazi rulers at last came fully out into the open. The National Resistance Council had planned thoroughly for the day of vengeance. They concluded their preparations coolly and waited for the right moment to strike. Finally, on August 19th, the resistance opened fire. Once started, the insurrection quickly gained momentum. The revolt was successful in one sense. Numbers of the enemy were killed, and German administrators in key civil posts were put to rout. The German grip on Paris was effectively loosened by the FFI. But many felt that the revolt was premature. It soon became apparent that the Parisians were not quite strong enough to win back their city completely without aid.
When the Free French forces inside Paris staged their uprising, it was necessary to move rapidly to their support. Information indicated that no great battle would take place, and it was believed that the entry of one or two Allied divisions would accomplish the liberation of the city. For the honor of first entry, General Leclerc's French 2nd Division was selected. It was a satisfying climax to an odyssey which, in its entire length, carried all the way from Central Africa to Berchtesgaden in Germany.
General Leclerc's men entered Paris on August 24th and immediately restored the city officially to French authority. For 50 months, Parisians had waited for this moment, when they could again breathe the air of freedom so long denied them. Overnight, Paris was once again gay and happy. The people's unshakable trust in the return of a free France had proved sound. Liberty, equality, fraternity was again the standard. But the French soldiers still had the enemy to contend with. General Leclerc's tank crews and American Shermans used their experience gained at Le Mans and Alençon to good advantage. Paris again became a battleground. Many of its most fashionable avenues were under constant enemy sniper fire. To assist the French 2nd Division, elements of the American 4th Division were sent in, and American and French soldiers fought side by side in what was inevitably an unplanned action. The skirmish in the Paris area continued throughout the greater part of 2 days. Allied tanks proved invaluable as street fighting weapons. With the last remnants of the Nazi defenders dead or captured, the Germans surrendered to the Allies on August 25th. The Nazi soldiers who had strutted around Paris with such a show of invincibility presented a far different picture. They fully realized the hate Parisians had grown to have toward them and seemed to anticipate far from gentle treatment now that the positions were reversed. The city was formally surrendered to the Allies by General Dietrich von Holtitz as commander of the Nazi garrison, which had dwindled to 12,000 men.
Immediately after the capture of Paris, I notified General de Gaulle that I hoped he would quickly enter the capital. I desired that he, as the symbol of French resistance, should make an entrance before I had to go in or through it.
The victory celebration was quickly thrown into disorder by sudden bursts of machine gun and rifle fire. The crowds near the Cathedral of Notre Dame were directly in the line of fire of the rooftop snipers, who were clearly Vichy militiamen and French collaborationists. The shooting spread. Soon they were shooting all over central Paris. When any of this group of snipers were caught, they fared far worse at the hands of the Parisians than had the Germans captured during the earlier fighting.
On the Saturday following the capture of Paris, I determined to make a formal call upon General de Gaulle. We entered Paris quietly and secretly, as we supposed, on Sunday, August 27th. Word apparently got out that Bradley and I were in town, and we were surrounded by a crowd of enthusiastic citizens. The exuberant greetings were a bit embarrassing, and we made our way as quickly as possible to one of the exit gates. I promised de Gaulle that 2 of our divisions would march to the front through the main avenues of the city. I declined personally to be present at this formation, but told him that General Bradley would come back to the city and stand the review to symbolize Allied unity. Because this ceremonial march coincided exactly with the local battle plan, it became possibly the only instance in history of troops marching in parade through the capital of a great country to participate in pitched battle on the same day. The liberation of Paris had a great impact on people everywhere.
In town after town in their victorious drive up the Rhone Valley, the GIs were greeted with enthusiasm by the overjoyed French townspeople. On September 11th, junction was made between the Southern France assault force and American units which had entered France from the Atlantic coast. In the Dijon area, the U.S. 7th and 3rd Army troops made contact, and Western France was sealed off. For the final push to the German frontier, the Allies presented a single powerful battle line. Sparking the drive to the east was Patton's 3rd Army.
Patton realized that through speed and determination, each successive advantage is more easily and economically gained than the previous one. Relentless and speedy pursuit is the most profitable action in war.
But the Germans did not simply fall back. The Nazis showed every intention of fighting savagely for every mile of eastern France still in their hands. They used all available mobile equipment in their strong effort to stem the Allied advance along the whole battle line. In a concerted attempt to stabilize their defense, The Nazis fought stubbornly, fully aware that if this stand were unsuccessful, the Allies would, before long, penetrate into Germany itself. In their determined defense, they used their newest, most improved weapon. The Allies hammered continuously at the Nazi line, which had stiffened abruptly. The Allied attack was not quite strong enough. Though handicapped by lengthening supply lines, the Allies kept up their attack on all sections of the front in an all-out drive toward the German frontier. The battle continued for weeks during the early autumn. Elements of Patton's Third Army advanced the Allied position a little closer to the German Siegfried Line as they crossed the Meuse River.
We were certain that by continuing an unremitting offensive, we would, in spite of hardship and privation, gain additional advantages over the enemy. Specifically, we were convinced that this policy would result in shortening the war, and therefore in the saving of thousands of Allied lives. Consequently, the fall period was to become a memorable one because of a series of bitterly contested battles, usually conducted under the most trying conditions of weather and terrain. The fighting throughout the front, from Switzerland to the mouth of the Rhine, descended during the late fall months to the dirtiest kind of infantry slugging. Advances were slow and laborious. Gains were ordinarily measured in terms of yards rather than miles. Operations became mainly a matter of endurance, stamina, and courage. Because of depletion of their infantry strength, divisions quickly exhausted themselves in action. Our offensive strength fell off markedly. During the 3 months beginning September 1st, I spent a great portion of my time in travel. I visited commanders in their own headquarters, kept personal touch with problems as they arose, and above all, gained a feel of the troops.
All along the front, Allied planes kept up the attack on Nazi defensive positions. American troops advanced yard by yard in the drive to push the enemy back within his own borders.
The French First Army led the attack on the Belfort Gap and reached it within a week. Its leading troops quickly reached the Rhine. This turned the flank of the German position in the Vosges Mountains and forced a general withdrawal. We were disposed along a line which, beginning in the north on the banks of the Rhine, stretched 500 miles southward to the border of Switzerland. All our divisions were short in infantry replacements, and in total numerical strength of ground forces, the Germans still had a marked advantage. We could, on the average, deploy less than one division to each 10 miles of front. By October 1st, our aggregate strength on the continent was 54 divisions. As a result of the junction with Patch's 7th Army, a considerable number of Germans were trapped in southwestern France. These began to give themselves up by driblets, except in one instance when 20,000 Germans surrendered in a single body.
At Beaugency on September 17th, Nazi General Erich Elster had surrendered 20,000 German troops under his command, marking the end of the Nazi Army of Occupation in southern France. The mass surrender was made without the loss of a single Allied soldier's life. In the north, the Allies decided to drop 3 parachute divisions into German-held Holland in an operation ultimately designed to turn the Nazis' northern flank. The British 1st Airborne Division was to land farthest north, near Arnhem, while the Americans of the 82nd and 101st Airborne were dropping a bit farther south. The operation was regarded as a large gamble, but if the Nazi bridges across the Rhine in the north could be seized, the war might be shortened materially. The drops were executed as planned. The first landings by the main airborne forces were made on September 17th and continued for several days following. Initial losses were slight, but there were some. In 2 weeks, more than 20,000 airborne troops had dropped into Holland. Over 13,000 more landed in gliders, which had been towed across the English Channel.
The attack began well, and unquestionably would have been successful, except for the intervention of bad weather. This prevented the adequate reinforcement of the northern spearhead, and resulted finally in the decimation of the British Airborne Division, and only a partial success in the entire operation.
But the Allied airborne troops in Holland accomplished one important task. Of the bridges to be seized, one of the most vital was the Nijmegen Bridge over the Waal, a branch of the Rhine. British and American troops surprised the Nazi force guarding the bridge and captured the valuable prize before the defenders had a chance to set off the demolitions already prepared. Allied ground forces moved safely across and continued the attack.
During the fall months, there was, as originally planned, much to be done operationally. In the north, besides capturing the approaches to Antwerp, it was desirable to make progress toward closing the Rhine, because it was from this region that our heaviest attacks would be launched in the crossing of that river. Winter conditions were now approaching, and Montgomery's advances were made over difficult country. Because of the extended front held by Montgomery's 21st Army Group, it was impossible at the moment to launch further strong offensives in that area.
To the south of the British forces, the Americans also ran into trouble.
The American First Army got involved in the Hurtgen Forest, the scene of one of the most bitterly contested battles of the entire campaign. The enemy had all the advantages of strong defensive country. The weather was abominable, and the German garrison was particularly stubborn.
All along the front in the Aachen sector, as winter drew near, the fighting continued heavy. But in the Hurtgen Forest, the battle was especially tough.
After the battle, whenever veterans of the American 4th, 9th, and 28th Divisions referred to hard fighting, they did so in terms of comparison with the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, which they placed at the top of the list. Yankee doggedness had finally won.
By mid-December, the Allies had penetrated the outer defenses of the Siegfried Line at several points. A American troops were crossing the German frontier in preparation for the final phase of the war in Europe. Only 6 months after the Normandy beaches had been stormed, the battle for Germany was begun.
But there was a threatening physical weakness in our communication zone, stretching from the French coast to the front, that endangered our future offensive operations. The lifeblood of supply was running perilously thin throughout the forward extremities of the Army.